Charles Bronson was Hollywood's toughest tough guy, but there was one man who pushed him over the edge. It wasn't a rival actor or a harsh critic. It was someone who mocked his deepest insecurity on the set of The Dirty Dozen. The director thought it was harmless fun. Bronson saw it as betrayal, and he never let it go. The grudge cut so deep that even 30 years later, Bronson still talked about revenge. Now, the truth behind one of Hollywood's darkest feuds finally comes to light. Because the man who became Charles Bronson, he was never meant to be famous. Born Charles Dennis Bakinski in a coal mining town in Pennsylvania, he was the 11th of 15 kids in a family that barely scraped by. Parents were Lithuanian immigrants, and survival was their only goal. At just 6, he was so poor he had to wear his sister's dress to school. Clothes were a luxury they couldn't afford. He didn't speak English, only Lithuanian and Russian, making him feel like a stranger in his own country. That quiet, hardened intensity he brought to the screen. It wasn't an act. It was survival. Things only got worse when his father died. Bronson was 10. While other kids were in school or playing outside, he was deep in the coal mines. The work was suffocating, backbreaking, and endless. For 12 hours a day, he hauled coal through narrow shafts for just $1 a ton. He never complained. He kept going, even giving up his own clothes to help his younger siblings. Despite everything, he managed to finish high school, the first in his family to do so. At 21, he saw a way out and enlisted in the Army Air Forces during World War II. As a gunner on a B-29 bomber over Japan, he faced real combat. He was wounded on one mission and received a Purple Heart. Even then, Bronson said military life was an upgrade. "I never had it so good," he admitted. For a boy raised on hunger and hardship, 3 meals and a bed felt like heaven. Some later doubted his war record, but his service was legitimate. Bronson had been in the thick of it. After the war, he bounced between odd jobs until fate handed him a break, though not in the way you'd expect. He got hired at a tiny theater company, not to act, but to paint sets. But something about being near the stage sparked something inside him. Soon, he started landing small parts. He wasn't flashy or loud, but his presence was undeniable. Before long, he was sharing a cramped New York apartment with another unknown actor, Jack Klugman. 1949, he took a leap and moved to Hollywood, determined to make it. Bronson arrived in Tinseltown. His face told a story of survival. Harsh, weathered, and carved by poverty, he didn't look like a classic leading man. Casting agents didn't see a star. They saw a villain. That rugged face got him cast as nameless thugs, enforcers, and henchmen. No lines, no backstory, just fists and fury. He still went by Charles Bakinski then, but in the McCarthy-era fear of all things foreign, that name was a liability. So, he reinvented himself. He took the name Bronson, from the Bronson Gate at Paramount Studios. A small change, but in Hollywood, appearances were everything. The new name helped him blend in just enough to get by. In the early 50s, he worked non-stop, bit parts, background roles, anything he could get. He played faceless soldiers, silent brutes, and men meant to be forgotten. He wasn't flashy, but he left an impression. Even in silence, Charles Bronson made you look twice. You couldn't ignore him forever. There was something in Bronson's stare, a quiet fire that seemed to say, "You don't know me yet, but you will." That fire finally lit up the screen in Drumbeat. 1954 was a western starring Alan Ladd, and Bronson played Captain Jack, a Mortic warrior resisting US expansion. Based on real events, the role wasn't just acting for Bronson, it was transformation. He didn't need many lines. His face told the whole story: pride, pain, and the quiet defiance of a man pushed too far. One critic said he stole the whole film. But it wasn't just praise, it was a warning. Bronson wasn't content to be thug number 2 anymore. That jail cell scene near the end changed things. There was humor, vulnerability, a rhythm to his performance that surprised everyone. Drumbeat earned him a seat at the big table, and for the first time, audiences really looked his way. 4 years later, he got his name on top of a movie poster. Machine Gun Kelly wasn't a blockbuster. It was made fast and cheap, but Bronson turned it into something unforgettable. He played the title character like a man haunted by the myth of his own power. Tough on the outside, terrified inside. His chemistry with co-star Susan Cabot, who played his ruthless lover, sparked every scene. There's one robbery sequence with no dialogue, just Bronson's body doing the work. His eyes told you everything. Critics didn't just praise it, they were stunned. The film was raw, gritty, and real. For the first time, people whispered, maybe this guy can carry a movie. But Hollywood wasn't ready to listen. Not yet. Despite the buzz, Bronson was still stuck on the sidelines. He starred in Man with a Camera on TV and kept getting solid roles in major films, The Magnificent Seven, The Great Escape, The Dirty Dozen, but always as a sidekick, never the star. He was already in his 40s, an age when most actors give up chasing the dream. But Bronson didn't know how to quit. While American studios overlooked him, Europe saw something else. In France, Italy, and Germany, he was already a legend. Cold, quiet, strong, European directors loved his silence, his tension, his stare. Across the Atlantic, he became a star long before Hollywood ever gave him a chance. It wasn't easy. For years, the studios didn't know what to do with him. Too ethnic, too rugged, not polished enough. Bronson once joked he looked like a dynamited rock quarry, and Hollywood agreed. That's why he kept getting cast as anything but himself. Native Americans, Mexicans, Greeks, anyone that looked foreign enough. But the tide started to turn when director John Sturges cast him as Bernardo O'Reilly in The Magnificent Seven. At 39, Bronson was older than most rising stars. But this role gave him more than screen time. It gave him depth. He played a gunfighter with a conscience. A man who knew that true courage didn't come from a gun. In one quiet scene, he tells young village boys that their fathers, the farmers risking everything for their families, were the real heroes. That line hit hard, especially in Europe, where the film became a massive hit. It didn't just launch his international stardom. It showed the world Bronson had more to offer than just brute strength. 3 years later, The Great Escape gave him another shot to go deeper. He played Danny, the claustrophobic tunneler helping to engineer a massive power breakout. That fear in his eyes. It wasn't acting. Bronson had lived it, trapped underground in coal mines as a boy. That raw memory made the role painfully real. Director John Sturges knew exactly what he was doing when he cast Bronson, to prove that even the toughest man in the room could be vulnerable. The result was unforgettable, especially in Europe, where Bronson was already becoming something bigger than a star. But while his fame climbed, his personal life started to crack. During the filming of The Great Escape, Bronson fell in love with Jill Ireland. The catch: she was married to his friend and co-star, David McCallum. Bronson didn't hide his feelings. Reeling from the death of his mother and the collapse of his own marriage, he made a bold move that shocked Hollywood. It caused fallout, but also gave him the love of his life. Bronson and Ireland married in 1968, and their bond lasted over 2 decades. She wasn't just his partner, she became his co-star in more than a dozen films. Together, they became one of Hollywood's most recognizable couples, especially in the 1970s, when Bronson finally broke through in America. But back in 1966, he was still just one of the Dirty Dozen, and the set was chaos. Filmed in England, the movie was packed with stars and egos, and Bronson didn't make things easier. Known on set as Charlie Sunshine for his moody silence, he mostly kept to himself. It wasn't just his nature, the shoot was brutal. Production dragged on for months. At one point, co-star Lee Marvin vanished and had to be dragged drunk from a local pub. Yet somehow, the film became a smash hit in 1967, outgrossing blockbusters and bringing in millions. Still, not every memory was golden. Bronson had one deep insecurity: his height. He was 5'8", and on that testosterone-fueled set, that fact became a cruel punchline. During a group scene, director Robert Aldrich placed Bronson between Clint Walker and Donald Sutherland, both well over 6 feet tall. The visual joke was obvious. Everyone laughed, except Bronson. Aldrich thought it was harmless. But to Bronson, it was a knife in the back. A cheap shot that cut past the image he'd spent years building. It wasn't just about ego. It was about respect. And Charles Bronson didn't forget disrespect. Charles Bronson spent years in the shadows, playing stone-faced enforcers while prettier actors soaked up the spotlight. He appeared in hits like The Magnificent Seven and The Dirty Dozen, but no one in Hollywood gave him the lead. His look was too rugged, his presence too intense. While studios recycled the same clean-cut heroes, Bronson waited. By 1968, he was 47, and still not a leading man in America. So, like Clint Eastwood before him, he packed his bags and went to Europe. But here's the twist: Europe didn't just accept Bronson. They saw what Hollywood missed. They didn't want pretty, they wanted power, grit, authenticity. That's when France came calling. Alain Delon, one of Europe's biggest stars, specifically requested Bronson as his co-star in Adieu L'Ami. The producers didn't sugarcoat it. Europe wasn't chasing matinee idols. They wanted character, and when that film hit theaters, Bronson hit like a thunderclap. French audiences couldn't get enough. The film exploded at the box office, and Bronson finally got the screen time he'd earned. His chemistry with Delon was raw and magnetic. Critics raved. Audiences came back for second and third viewings. Then, lightning struck again. Sergio Leone, the genius behind The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, offered Bronson the lead in Once Upon a Time in the West. Years earlier, Bronson had turned down Leone's A Fistful of Dollars, the role that launched Clint Eastwood. This time, he said yes, and it was worth every second. The movie became a sensation across Europe. In Paris, it played for a full year. In Italy, France, and Germany, Bronson was unstoppable. Leone even called him the best actor he ever worked with. That silent glare, the weight behind every movement, Bronson didn't just act, he commanded. Then came Rider on the Rain, a moody French thriller that won a Golden Globe and pushed him into legend territory. More hits followed: Cold Sweat, Violent City, Red Sun, each one written for Bronson's quiet fire. These weren't just parts, they were showcases for everything Hollywood had overlooked. Each role featured the same kind of man, tough, quiet, moral to the bone. Audiences couldn't get enough. Women adored him. Men wanted to be him. By the time he returned to Hollywood in the early 70s, he wasn't just an actor, he was a phenomenon. By 1973, he was earning $1 million per film, an outrageous sum at the time. At 52, when most actors faded into character roles, Bronson's real stardom was just beginning. A big part of that rise came from British director Michael Winner. Together, they made magic. Bronson's calm, lethal intensity paired perfectly with Winner's brutal, gritty style. Their first project, Chateau's Land, set the tone, and the blood only got thicker from there. When they made Death Wish, it wasn't supposed to be so violent. Another director was originally attached, but Winner pushed it darker. And Bronson, always the quiet storm, became the face of revenge. Audiences, they ate it up. The more critics condemned the violence, the more tickets sold. But before Death Wish, Bronson redefined what a hitman could be in The Mechanic. His character barely spoke, but every move was terrifyingly precise. The opening, 16 minutes with no dialogue. Just Bronson plotting a kill. Silent, focused, brilliant. The original script was even darker, hinting at a gay relationship between the killer and his apprentice. The studio cut that out, but what stayed was unforgettable. Bronson made murder look methodical, like art. He even got his wife, Jill Ireland, a role in the film, just as he would in many of his projects. He wasn't a one-note actor. In Chateau's Land, Bronson played a half Apache seeking vengeance after his wife is assaulted. In The Stone Killer, he was a tough detective hunting mobsters. Two very different characters, but Bronson made them both feel real. Off-camera, things got intense. A stunt nearly killed a crew member, and the car rental company panicked, trying to take the cars back mid-shoot. Director Michael Winner, known for his temper, didn't take it lightly. But these films solidified the Bronson brand, the silent punisher, the steel-eyed judge. The mid-70s, Bronson wasn't just a star. He was the world's top box office draw, bigger than Eastwood or Newman. While others crafted their public image, Bronson stayed silent. No interviews, no press smiles, just movies and that killer stare. Death Wish made a fortune, earning more than 10 times its budget. Studios finally realized that global fame mattered more than domestic charm. Bronson didn't change a thing. He let his silence speak louder than words. The role of Paul Kersey in Death Wish became iconic, a quiet architect turned relentless vigilante. At 52, he didn't look like a superhero, but like someone who'd had enough. Cold, unstoppable, but he had limits. He refused to let his wife, Jill Ireland, play the on-screen victim. "I don't want her messed around," he told the director. Death Wish hit theaters like a bomb. With America grappling with crime and distrust in the government, it felt like more than just a movie. Critics slammed it as dangerous and racist, but audiences couldn't get enough, walking out of theaters eager to buy guns. Some even shouted, "Death Wish," when they saw Bronson on the street, as if he were Paul Kersey. The line between actor and character blurred. The author of the original novel was horrified. He'd written it as a warning, but the public made Bronson their hero. In the dark, gritty streets of 1970s New York, filled with fear, trash, and graffiti, Bronson's silent stare and hidden pistol resonated deeply. For many, the film mirrored their daily struggles. Some neighborhoods even formed Kersey patrols. The impact was undeniable. Law enforcement worried about people taking justice into their own hands. Bronson wasn't just a star, he had become a symbol. Whether that was positive or negative depended on who you asked. But fame came at a cost. Bronson didn't like the spotlight, nor the evolution of Kersey. In interviews, he described feeling like a distorted version of himself. Fans knew him as a killer, but at home, he was a quiet man who painted and sculpted, craving peace. As Death Wish sequels became more extreme, Bronson admitted, "I just go through the motions." In Death Wish 3, he was mowing down gangs with machine guns, and it didn't feel real anymore. Contracts and money kept him returning to the role. Over 2 decades, from 1974 to 1994, the Kersey character became more extreme. What started as a broken man with a gun evolved into an urban soldier fighting warlords and crack dealers. Charles Bronson's love story began far from Hollywood. A broke 26-year-old coal miner, he met 18-year-old Harriet Tendler at an acting school in Philadelphia. On their first date, he had only 4 cents in his pocket. There was something raw and determined about him that caught Harriet's attention. Despite her father's objections, they married in 1949. For years, she supported him as Bronson chased his dream, which seemed impossible at the time. Eventually, success came with films like The Magnificent Seven and The Great Escape, but stardom came at a price. Their marriage, built on sacrifice, began to unravel by 1965, and they parted ways. Harriet later wrote a book about their life together, not bitter, but honest. She remembered him as a man who was far from perfect, but deeply devoted, a surprisingly talented painter and someone who never stopped pushing forward. In the midst of this, another woman entered Bronson's life unexpectedly. Jill Ireland, visiting her husband David McCallum on the set of The Great Escape, was approached by Bronson with a bold statement, "I'm going to marry your wife." Whether he actually said it or not, 5 years later, it happened. Jill Ireland divorced David McCallum in 1967, and Bronson finalized his own divorce 2 years earlier. In 1968, Bronson and Ireland married. Instead of drama, McCallum maintained his dignity, saying he held no grudge. For Bronson and Ireland, it marked the beginning of a deep and unique partnership that would span 2 decades and more than a dozen films. Their bond wasn't just about love, it became the foundation of Bronson's career. Between 1970 and 1987, Ireland appeared in nearly every movie Bronson made, 15 films in total. They weren't just co-stars, they were partners in every sense. Their life together was nomadic, moving with Bronson's career. Despite the constant relocations, they made it work, raising 7 children between them. They had homes in Bel Air, a farmhouse in Vermont, and a snowy retreat in Colorado. Jill raised horses, while Bronson stayed focused on his work. Together, they built a life that contrasted sharply with the gritty violence of his movies. Off-screen, Bronson was a different man, shy, so shy that he couldn't watch his own films. He preferred painting and family dinners over red carpets. Despite being the highest-paid actor in the world, he lived like a man who still remembered coal dust and hunger. Jill once shared a moment that perfectly captured his duality. When a director mistreated her, Bronson calmly walked over and physically shook some sense into him. That intense loyalty and protective nature defined Bronson. But nothing could protect him from what came next. In 1984, Jill was diagnosed with breast cancer. The same man who played violent vigilantes on screen now stood helpless beside his wife. For 6 years, Jill fought the disease with remarkable courage, speaking out publicly, writing memoirs, and even testifying before Congress. She didn't just survive, she became an inspiration. In 1990, Jill Ireland passed away at their Malibu home, leaving Bronson devastated. He cremated her and kept her ashes inside a walking cane, carrying it with him for the rest of his life. Despite his fame and fortune, Jill was what mattered most. In 1987, a British criminal named Michael Gordon Peterson changed his name to Charles Bronson for boxing promotion, though he'd never seen a Bronson film. The name stuck, and Peterson quickly built a violent reputation. Over the years, he became Britain's most dangerous prisoner, known for brutality, holding hostages, and staging protests. In 1999, he held an art teacher hostage for 44 hours, earning a life sentence. 2008, a film called Bronson starring Tom Hardy blurred the lines further. Peterson, who eventually saw the movie, claimed Hardy captured him perfectly. In 2014, Peterson changed his name to Charles Salvador, distancing himself from the violent persona, but the confusion continued. Meanwhile, the real Charles Bronson remained silent, not responding to the bizarre identity theft. Despite Peterson's infamy, Bronson's legacy as a Hollywood icon, devoted husband, and loyal man remained untouched, sealed through unforgettable films and a love story that lasted a lifetime.